In the spring of 1544, as a fishing vessel navigated the foggy Gulf of St. Lawrence, the crew saw the smoke first, thick, unnatural plumes rising from an island that should have been empty. For generations, sailors had whispered of this cursed place, where demons howled through the night and no man dared set foot. Yet there it was, smoke rising slowly against the gray morning sky. As their vessel drew closer to the rocky shore, they spotted a figure waving frantically from the beach. A wild-haired woman in animal furs stumbled toward the water's edge, shouting in French. When she fell to her knees in the sand, overwhelmed by the sight of human faces, the fishermen realized they had discovered something extraordinary, a survivor of the Isle of Demons. But how had a Frenchwoman come to be marooned on this god-forsaken rock, and what had she endured to stay alive? In April 1542, 3 French ships left La Rochelle harbor. Their hulls were weighed down by cannons, timber, livestock, and 200 people bound for New France. King Francois I of France had named Jean Francois de Roberval lieutenant general of the new colony in Canada. He was tasked with establishing fortified towns, spreading the Catholic faith, and seeking the legendary wealth of the Kingdom of Saguenay. To fund the venture, the king paid Roberval 45,000 livres and granted him permission to recruit convicts as workers. Roberval, a soldier turned corsair who had only recently regained royal favor after a Protestant exile, also mortgaged part of his inheritance to outfit the fleet. Success in Canada could wipe out his debts and restore his reputation at a court rife with factions. Among the passengers was his relative, Marguerite de La Rocque. In her late 20s, she was unmarried yet already tied to estates in Périgord and Languedoc. She and Roberval were co-owners of Pontpoint, a valuable asset that had served as collateral for his growing loans. As his ward, Marguerite welcomed the voyage as an adventure and a chance to gain new North American lands, and perhaps to meet a husband beyond the limited marriage market of provincial France. For 7 weeks, the small fleet sailed northwest into cold, gray seas. Icy fog hung around the masts, and icebergs drifted past like massive castles. Below decks, the air reeked of wet wool, tar, and too many bodies. Though Marguerite stayed close to her maid Damienne, she found unexpected companionship in the cramped darkness. A handsome young gentleman, his name now lost to history, caught her attention. Each evening they met beneath flickering lantern light and quickly fell in love. Whispers of their romance soon spread through the ship. When word of Marguerite's lover reached Roberval, anger clouded his judgment. He declared that the scandal stained the family's honor, though deeper motives lurked. Marguerite was co-heir to lands he badly needed. "You have brought shame upon our name," he told her. As the fleet neared the Gulf of St. Lawrence, a dark shape loomed on the horizon. An island sailors spoke of only in whispers, cursed by fierce winds and haunting spirits. It was here that Roberval chose to make an example of Marguerite. The longboats were lowered on a dreary morning. Waves crashed against the rocky shore as Marguerite and her maid were ordered aboard, facing the crew's scornful stares. This barren place was called the Isle of Demons. Dense forest covered the island, and wind whistled through stunted pines. Local legends said evil spirits roamed here, howling through the night. His men dumped limited supplies on the beach: a musket, gunpowder, a knife, and a Bible. Hardly enough to survive in the wilderness. The 2 women stood on wet sand, watching the ship's boats pull away. Roberval's vessel disappeared into the fog, leaving them alone on an empty island. But as the last trace of the ship vanished, a splash caught Marguerite's attention. A figure plunged into the icy waves, battling the currents as he swam toward shore. Her heart raced. Her lover had defied Roberval's orders and jumped overboard to join her. He struggled through the biting cold sea, finally staggering onto the beach with desperately needed supplies: a second musket, gunpowder, and a small pack of food. Marguerite dropped to her knees and embraced him. That first day, he built a crude shelter from pine boughs and driftwood while the women gathered whatever they could find. wild berries, roots, and herbs. It was late summer, and they found mild weather and fresh water from a spring. In the days that followed, the trio settled into a routine. He caught fish and snared rabbits, using the musket to shoot seabirds while carefully rationing their powder. Marguerite and Damien searched for eggs and collected driftwood to keep their fire alive. Each evening they gathered around their precious fire while Marguerite read softly from her Bible, trying to lift their spirits against the gathering darkness. Northern summer gave way to autumn gales, biting winds arriving every day. The trio dried fish and smoked whatever meat they could find, preparing their hut for the hard days to come. Snowstorms buried their shelter. Icy gusts blew in from the sea, seeping through every crack. The ground froze solid, and a heavy silence fell over the woods as even the animals became scarce. By December, their stored food ran low. Hunting grew nearly impossible as animals vanished and the waters froze solid. Her lover searched farther each day through deep snow, desperately seeking any sign of life. The three survivors began digging under snow for roots or lichen they could boil into a bitter broth. They gnawed on tree bark, their gums bleeding as their bodies weakened. The young man fell gravely ill. His face swelled and his skin turned pale, clear signs of scurvy taking hold. Marguerite cared for him in their dark hut, pouring melted snow between his cracked lips. One bitter night in February 1543, his breathing became ragged. By flickering firelight, her beloved drew his last breath in her arms, gazing at her with a look of peace that would haunt her forever. The earth was frozen solid. She could not dig a grave. Choking back tears, she made a desperate decision. She would keep his body safe until the thaw allowed for a proper burial. They wrapped the body in spare cloth and fur, placing it in a corner of the hut. Throughout the remaining weeks of that harsh winter, Marguerite endured his presence in the hut. Yet somehow she persevered, caring for aging Damien and keeping the spark of life alive within their fragile shelter. Spring arrived slowly. With great effort, Marguerite and Damien dug a proper grave in the softening soil, choosing a peaceful spot under stunted pines near their cabin. There, Marguerite laid her lover to rest. In the midst of this heartache, Marguerite carried a spark of new life. Unknown to anyone during winter's chaos, she had been pregnant. The scandal that led to their exile was now nearing its consequence. In late spring, she went into labor. On the cold dirt floor of their hut, aided only by Damien's trembling hands, she gave birth to a tiny girl. For a brief moment, joy flickered in Marguerite's heart, as the cries of the newborn broke the silence. But the infant was fragile, nourished only by Marguerite's starvation diet. They had no proper food for a newborn, only thin gruel, which the baby could not digest. Marguerite sang lullabies as she and Damien struggled to keep the infant warm and fed. They swaddled her in scraps of fur and dripped water into her mouth. One cold dawn, Marguerite awoke to unbearable stillness in her arms. Her daughter had slipped away in the night, silent and peaceful at last. With trembling fingers, she wrapped the tiny body carefully. Later that day, under a gray sky, Marguerite dug a small grave beside her lover's, placing her infant daughter into the earth with great tenderness. Through the summer of 1543, the two women did their best to survive. The island bloomed, yielding berries, edible roots, and occasional waterfowl eggs. Marguerite trapped rabbits and caught fish using makeshift lines. But the elderly maid grew weaker with each passing day. By autumn, Marguerite understood that another winter on the island would prove deadly for them both. The second winter arrived even more mercilessly than the first. Snow came earlier and piled high, sealing the island in a tomb of white. Marguerite did everything she could to keep her last companion alive. She maintained the fire day and night. She shared every bit of food with Damien, denying herself to keep the old woman alive. Still, Damien's strength faded. In the dark depths of midwinter, shortly after the new year of 1544, Damienne slipped away in her sleep. Marguerite awoke to find the only other living soul on the island gone forever. She dug a grave for her loyal friend when the ground allowed, laying Damienne to rest beside the others. From that moment, something in Marguerite hardened into steel. If she was to survive, she would have to become as fierce and relentless as the elements themselves. Wrapping herself in a patchwork of furs and rags, Marguerite took her musket and ventured into the snow on dangerous hunting trips. She followed animal tracks, hare, fox, and even huge paw prints of bears. One fateful day, Marguerite found herself face to face with one of the island's apex predators. A bear lumbered into the clearing near her cabin, enormous and starving, with black eyes fixed on the lone human. Marguerite's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to remain calm. There was nowhere to escape. As the bear rose onto its hind legs and roared, Marguerite raised her musket and fired. The shot shattered the silence like thunder, and the bullet struck true. The massive predator fell. She had brought down the beast herself. The bear's fur became her bedding, its tendons turned into cordage and its bones into tools. Yet nights on the island tested Marguerite's sanity most of all. When wind howled through the trees, it sounded like wailing voices. Often she woke convinced she'd heard someone calling her name, only to step outside and find nothing but emptiness. Blood-chilling shrieks echoed across the frozen bay, like souls crying out in eternal torment. In those desperate moments, Marguerite turned to the only source of comfort she had left: her faith. She would retreat into the hut and read her Bible. With a trembling voice, she read aloud into the darkness, passages from the Psalms, the Gospel, any words of hope. As her voice carried the sacred verses into the night, a strange calm often followed. By the end of that second winter, Marguerite de La Rocque had been alone for many months. No longer the elegant lady, she had become a gaunt, weather-beaten survivor. Her clothes were tattered, patched with fur and hide. Her face was hollowed by hunger, her hair a wild tangle. As the spring of 1544 arrived, Marguerite had survived 2 unimaginable years on the island and had been alone for much of a year. She tended a signal fire on a high crag whenever the weather permitted, feeding it with damp branches to create smoke. One cool morning, as Marguerite watched her fire, she spotted a dark shape on the shimmering water. A 2-masted fishing vessel was slowly moving into the bay. Marguerite's heart raced. She piled green boughs onto her fire to send up thick smoke, waving her arms wildly. The sailors on the ship noticed the unusual smoke and changed course to investigate. Marguerite stumbled down to the beach as the vessel's rowing boat approached. She must have seemed a frightening sight. A wild-haired woman in animal furs, waving her arms and shouting hoarsely in French. The fishermen, wary of the island's fearsome reputation, approached with weapons drawn. As they got closer, they saw she was indeed human, and a Frenchwoman at that. The crew jumped ashore to help the emaciated figure, who fell to her knees, overwhelmed with emotion. After so long without human contact, words failed her. She could only sob and offer broken thanks to God and her rescuers. The fisherman threw a cloak around her shoulders and gave her water and bread. The simple comfort felt overwhelming after so long without it. Once she steadied herself, Marguerite led the men to her campsite. In her small hut, they saw the basic comforts of a determined survivor: a fire pit ringed with stones, bundles of dried meat and fish, and the Bible laid respectfully on a flat rock. Outside, the small grave markers told their own story. Marguerite knelt by each grave and briefly shared their tale: her lover, her child, her maid, whose bodies rested in this wild soil. They carefully helped Marguerite into their boat. As the oarsmen headed toward the ship, Marguerite looked back at the vanishing shoreline, whispering a prayer for the souls she left buried there. After several weeks at sea, the ship returned to France. When Marguerite finally set foot on her homeland's soil. She knelt and kissed the ground, overwhelmed with gratitude for this second chance at life. Marguerite's survival story fascinated the French court. Nobles whispered in awe of the maiden who had hunted bears and defied demons to stay alive. As for Marguerite herself, she sought a quieter life after the initial attention. Her brush with death had deeply changed her view on what truly mattered. No longer interested in courtly intrigue, she settled in southwestern France, where she opened a small school. She never sought revenge against Roberval, who met his own end elsewhere in the New World. Perhaps her experience taught her that life was too valuable to waste on vengeance. Marguerite de La Rocque spent her later years in peace, away from public attention. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time and hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked what you saw, check out the other great content on my channel. Your support means a lot, and I can't wait to bring you more. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next one.